Johnny Carson's 10 Greatest Regrets at Last. Johnny Carson welcomed America into our living rooms for 30 years, his dry smile, acerbic monologues, and soft-spoken interviewing manner, such that he became part of the family to millions. As host of The Tonight Show, Carson honed a public persona so effortless that audiences felt they knew him personally, the affable everyman with the quick wit and the legendary golf swing. But backstage, behind the applause and the politely rehearsed delivery, Carson had profound regrets that he carried to his death. Johnny was the most private superstar who ever lived, disclosed one veteran NBC executive who worked with him for over a decade. What publics saw was only the surface, a well-choreographed version of himself who concealed the disappointments and errors that dogged him to the end. Now, those regrets, some professional, some intensely personal, show us a man who, for all his great success, was having trouble reconciling the private failure with the public fame. These are not tabloid gossip, but stories verified by those around him, producers, writers, friends, family, and friends who saw up close the moments Carson wished he could undo. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. But first, one must comprehend why regret hurt him so deeply. For all his greatness, Carson was a man who prioritized control more than anything, but many of his regrets were the result of times that control had slipped away from him, leaving him with wounds that never healed. The most iconic of these concerned Joan Rivers, his protege turned rival. Rivers had been Carson's regular guest host for years, filling in when Johnny was off on vacation, and their chemistry on the air was magic, her quick, stiletto-keen wit trading off with his Midwestern straight-man charm. Off-camera, Carson appeared to be on fond terms with her, even giving her hosting tips. But when Rivers accepted an offer to guest host The Late Show on Fox in 1986, she didn't break the news to Johnny. He learned from a press announcement, not a phone call, and to him, it was betrayal of the worst kind. His reaction was immediate. He blacklisted her, wouldn't take her calls, and never again spoke to her. The hurt cut even deeper when a year afterward, Rivers' husband Edgar Rosenberg committed suicide. Joan called Carson hoping, if not for apology, at least for sympathy. He did not reply. It was no longer business, it was personal, and it remained so. However, as reported by several sources, Carson subsequently regretted the absolute nature of his response. In his later years, in private, he confessed that although he was right to be angry, to cut her off so suddenly, particularly in the midst of her bereavement, was cruel beyond necessity. By this time, however, it was too late. Rivers spent the remaining years of her life bearing that scar, and Carson never laid eyes on her again. She wasn't invited back to The Tonight Show until Jimmy Fallon welcomed her in 2014, more than 9 years after Carson died. That estrangement was one of his greatest regrets, the first of numerous ones. The second was love and money, marrying Joanna Holland without a prenuptial agreement. Carson was spontaneous when it came to love, and in 1972, during what Holland believed was just an anniversary dinner party, Johnny took her by surprise and pulled out marriage certificates. It was romantic, impulsive, irresponsible, and expensive. 3 years later, she gave him divorce papers, retaining more than $20 million in one of Hollywood's most costly settlements ever. Later, Carson joked caustically with sidekick Ed McMahon, "Never marry anyone without a lawyer in the room. Love fades, but alimony is forever." Underlying the wisecrack was true anguish. This was his third divorce, and by this time he had shelled out close to $30 million to former wives. His lawyer, Henry Bushkin, characterized Carson as more cynical toward relationships afterwards, inserting bitter shots at marriage into his monologues that weren't written. While his fourth marriage to Alexis Moss endured until his death, it was owing only to his finally safeguarding himself with a comprehensive prenup. In private, he acknowledged this prior error, being blinded by romance and leaving himself open, was a choice that tormented him for decades. The third of Carson's regrets was much more intimate, pushing away his youngest son, Rick. Carson had 3 sons with his first wife, Jody Walcott, But with Rick, his relationship was the most strained. Rick suffered from mental illness, fought DUIs, and was even committed against his will at one point. Carson, emotionally unfit to cope with such issues, pulled away instead of reached out. Johnny's solution to family crisis was to write a check, one colleague remembered. He wasn't heartless, he just didn't have any tools for coping with something as complicated as mental illness. This emotional remove spawned a cycle of anguish. Rick fell apart, Johnny distanced himself further. In 1991, there was disaster when Rick was killed in a car crash at the age of only 39. Carson spoke briefly about it on the show, acknowledged viewers' condolences, and promptly resumed business as usual. Behind closed doors, though, he was devastated. Friends remembered him drinking late at night and saying, "I should have done more." His remorse as a father was something he bore in silence, but in weight until his death. Professionally, one regret was salient: not embracing Richard Pryor. Pryor was a revolutionary comedian, raw and unfiltered, profane and brilliant. But Carson booked him on The Tonight Show infrequently. Producers feared that Pryor was too mercurial for network censors, and Johnny himself felt uneasy with material that couldn't be managed. Carson respected timing, polish, form. Pryor was chaos and genius combined. Johnny liked to be in control, a writer said, and Richard couldn't be controlled. Carson later privately admitted that he had botched Pryor's growing influence. Carson said Pryor was one of the best we ever had, and wished he had discovered a means to showcase him more prominently during his peak. Pryor's health was declining due to multiple sclerosis before he realized it. The opportunity was lost. One of his regrets was Don Rickles, Carson's favorite foil in the early days. Rickles' insult humor and Johnny's straight man responses made for classic television. But during one night in 1970s, Rickles cracked a joke about Carson's divorce and alimony. Ground Johnny felt was strictly taboo. In front of the camera, he chuckled. Behind the scenes, he froze. Their friendship never recovered. Although they were still friendly and Rickles continued to pop up here and there, the affection was lost. Carson attempted a reconciliation later, even inviting Rickles to eat with him, but the fire was gone. He complained to a friend once, "I wish I hadn't let that one joke change things, but I did." Rickles later conceded that Johnny had a grudge-holding capacity like no one else, and this loss bothered Carson as another preventable loss. His sixth was his departure from television itself. Carson went off the air for the final time in 1992, delivering a warm but unemotional goodbye. 50 million watched, one of the highest-rated broadcasts ever. But then Johnny vanished. He rebuffed interviews, tributes, awards, and reunions, opting for complete silence. At the time, he believed cutting ties was the way to go. But subsequently, he confessed it left him unsatisfied. "I think I should have thanked the people more," he said to a friend half a year into retirement. He regretted that he had never really thanked his staff, his crew, or even his viewers. "I didn't say goodbye properly to the party, and now there's no time," he admitted. That mistake nagged him in retirement, fueling his isolation. Seventh was his connection to NBC. For many years, NBC would not grant Carson complete authority of The Tonight Show. He was their leading star, but they always had a knife for his back pocket, as he once put it. Only in 1981 was he finally able to wrestle rights to ownership and establish Carson Productions. By that time, he calculated he had lost more than $100 million in revenue he would have earned if he had moved earlier. He also knew NBC repeatedly wooed substitutes while he negotiated his contract, even when he was still number one. "Networks have no loyalty," he scornfully said. "I gave them my life, and they still wanted to replace me." He came to regret not going solo much earlier and was angry at the limited role he had in determining his replacement. In secret, he liked David Letterman better, but his distant management style left NBC to select Jay Leno. He afterwards confessed to friends he wished he had struggled more to control his legacy. The eighth regret concerned Chevy Chase. In the late 1970s, Chase was a guest on The Tonight Show in the height of his popularity, but the interview went horribly. arrogant, not funny, and finishing with a sarcasm about Carson's divorces, Chase found himself on Johnny's permanent blacklist. Chase never came back. Carson was right at the time, but many years later in retirement, he conceded that he might have been too severe. Chevy was a pain in the ass, he said to a friend, but I could have been bigger about it. Everyone has a bad night. For a man known to harbor grudges, this unusual mollifying demonstrated how regret could catch up with him. The ninth regret was systemic, not booking women comedians. Aside from Joan